to respect and uphold the ideals of our country: liberty, equality, democracy, respect for the rule of law, and patriotism, which means gratitude and respect.
Welcome back to Be Not Afraid, a podcast dedicated to lifting the voices of everyday dissidents and giving you the tools and the courage you need to survive in our postmodern world. Today's guest is one of my real-life heroes. She created American Preparatory Academy, has created a school that's built on merit and the things that we used to see. And I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad to share this conversation with you. So without further ado, welcome Carolyn Headlee Sharatte.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Carrie, for inviting me. Back when, I'll give you a little bit of background, because I think you had wanted me to share a little bit about how I got started with schools, right? And so when I was in high school, so we're going back to the 70s now, and Milton Friedman came, amazing economist, right? He came to Michigan and worked with my dad. My dad was Richard Headlee, that's my maiden name, Carolyn Headlee. So he came to Michigan and worked with my dad, and they penned an amendment to the state constitution of Michigan to support education. And my dad was just a businessman. He had 9 children, and he wasn't involved in politics except for this sort of thing, citizen initiatives, and eventually he did run for governor of the state of Michigan. But the point I'm making is, when I was a senior in high school, I traveled around with my dad around the state with this thing that was called the Headlee Amendment to the Constitution of Michigan. And he just had this little slide projector, and I would help advance the slides as he would give his little speech, and it was very short, about how to shore up funding for education is what it was in Michigan at the time. And he won, and he was able to amend the Constitution of the state of Michigan for the first time. But I learned that you can really make a difference. Our system is set up so that citizens can make a difference. We really do control a lot of what happens eventually. Right now, it's feeling hard. I know it feels like we have no control right now. But I learned from an early age that actually hard work, diligence, positivity, presenting your message with positivity really does make a huge difference in this world. Then when I got married, I had 7 kids in 9 years, and I was not that engaged in their education at first. My older ones, I was so busy I had twins last, and so I was like really busy with little ones at home. And we were living in Michigan, and I thought the schools were pretty good there. That's where I went to school from Michigan. And so when we ended up moving to Texas, it was a shock and a change. And I had 4 kids go to school in elementary in Texas for 5 years. And I really got to know the schools. I loved the principal at the school, and I got to know her and understand a lot about her philosophy and why the school was so organized and efficient and effective. And I just kind of thought, oh, that's what elementary school is all about. Now, I didn't say, but in the meantime, I did go to college, and I graduated from Brigham Young University in nursing. So I'm a registered nurse, and I focused on cognition and learning and things like that in psychiatric nursing. So here I'm with my kids, they're in school, they're getting a little bit older, I'm starting to get a little bit back into the community, and we moved to Colorado, and that was an interesting eye-opening experience as my kids entered schools that were highly disorganized, meaning the kids would maybe study the same book in 3 different grades. They might all be reading Charlotte's Web. And I'd say, what's going on? Is it Charlotte's Web month? And they'd say, no. The teachers just get to pick what books they like. I'm like, oh my heck. So if they all like Charlotte's Web and none of them like Old Yeller, does that mean that they are going to like never get to read Old Yeller? And they said, yeah, that's how it is. Teachers get to decide what happens here individually. I said, yeah, but how's it coordinated? And they're like, well, we don't really coordinate that part of the curriculum. And it really alarmed me, to be honest, because as a nurse, I thought if we ran the hospitals like this, people would just die. That's just how it is. If I didn't want to give penicillin because I didn't like it as much, and the other nurse didn't like to give whatever, it's like, that's not how it can work and actually be effective. So we were only there a few months when I noted that this was going to be a big problem. And there was an ad in the newspaper, and it said, if you want to start a charter school, come to the library Tuesday night. And I didn't know what a charter school was. This is like 1996. And I went to the library, and I met 2 amazing women who had moved from New Jersey to Colorado, who were as alarmed as I was. And they said, we're going to do this thing. And so honestly, that was November. And by the next September, we opened Platte River Academy, which is a K-8 charter school there in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. And it was a core knowledge school, which means Hirsch's curriculum which was fantastic. If you don't know about Hirsch's curriculum, but the core knowledge sequence is a really beautiful, broad content base of science, history, literature, poetry, art, music. I mean, everything. And it's very sequential, and with books called What Your First Grader Needs to Know, What Your Second Grader Needs to Know. So parents can buy those books. They can be really engaged with the school. The school knows exactly what we're teaching this year. And even if all the teachers love dinosaurs in first grade, that's not what we're teaching. That's in fourth grade, which is what I had found in the other schools, right? So we started that school. I actually then exposure, and I was on the board of a second charter school, still seeking higher academic achievement, because the school we opened was good, but it wasn't great. It wasn't excellent. After 2 years, I could tell that we weren't seeing what I had hoped our vision was. So I found another core knowledge charter school. I ran for the board. I got my kids in. It was also disappointing. So I finally got serious, and I did research to see who's the top performing core knowledge charter school in the state of Colorado. There were 17 at the time. I visited the top 3. And when I got to one in Colorado Springs, I stood in the lobby with tears streaming down my face saying, "You've cured cancer. Why haven't you told anyone? This is amazing. This school is so amazing." And so we got really excited about that school, and I visited many, many times, and they finally offered me a job, $8 an hour as a paraeducator working in the 4th grade. If I was willing to drive 40 miles each way, I could take my 4 little boys there. And people thought I was crazy but I loved the opportunity to be there at that school for a year and assisting a really master teacher in her classroom and learning all about the programs that brought them success. And unfortunately, after 1 year, our family relocated and we ended up here in Utah, where I kind of felt like I had to start over. And so the challenge to us was, if we can start another school, what would it be? And I said, well, it'd be a lot like Cheyenne Mountain Charter Academy, but I would like to make it stronger classical and also patriotic. We need to teach our kids, going back to the beginning of what I was saying, that our system of government is unique in the world. It is truly exceptional, and it does provide for citizens to become well educated, learn how to use the system, and then to try to impact the system to keep liberty going, because we want liberty going, right?
Well, and that's one of the things that I've recently come to realize, because we fool ourselves with the idea that education is neutral. We think we just want to keep things out, but we're so afraid of building things up so that our children will have certain values. We're afraid that we're going to be called biased.
So I think it's become very confused. And one of the things I love most is to try to clarify. We know that clarity, teacher clarity in the classroom, for example, is one of the top 2 important impactors of student success and academic achievement. Clarity in our society is so important. And the reason we're in trouble right now is because we have allowed definitions to become changed without consent of the general people. And so we can't talk to each other. That's all I'm saying. We can't talk to each other. And when you can't communicate, it's very difficult. This is not unovercomable. This is just something we have to have courage to do and not get upset about. And so, for example, at our school, we don't worry about this idea that we're neutral, because we don't think honesty has 2 sides. So we pick the things. Integrity to your word does not have 2 sides. We pick the things we call virtues, but people don't like that word, so now we just call them positive character traits. Those things there really aren't 2 sides. When you say you'll be in class at 8:15, if you're in class at 8:15, you've kept your word and you have integrity, and there's nothing to debate about that definition. When you say you will do something, complete a homework assignment, and you don't, then you've had a breach of your integrity. And we give students ways to deal with that, starting with humility, which is the gateway to all scholarship, which we know is in classical education. So we start with humility, and then we work with making amends and teaching how to make amends specifically, and how to give kids clean slates on a daily basis and give them to each other. None of that is left or right. That's all about human interaction. And I think one of our biggest challenges right now is to convince people that there is a whole body of stuff upon which we totally agree. And that we should, as a nation, our foundation of our nation was based on these principles of what we call morality and moral character. And honesty and integrity and trust are the foundation of everything in our businesses, in everything we do in the United States. If you go to another country and try to conduct business sometimes, which I've had the opportunity to do, we have a school in Zambia, you will find sometimes the standard is different. It doesn't mean the same thing as it does in America. We want our kids to grow up in our schools to understand what American traditional values are, and we believe honesty, integrity, diligence, hard work, kindness, consideration for the disadvantaged. All of those are American characteristics, I believe, that we embody, and beautifully they bless our country, they bless our families. And so we're not like moved by people who want to criticize us. Um, Although criticism does come, and it's just kind of a silly argument. Honesty is honesty, integrity is integrity, diligence and hard work are diligence and hard work. You can't fake them. Merit is merit. The score you earn is the score you get. But truthfully, especially when you look at our children, we know what we want for them, and we want them to be kind and honest and diligent and hardworking and successful and understand how to succeed in our system. And so that's our goal.
Well, and that's so universal. I had the privilege, I was astounded earlier this week to visit the West Valley School. And honestly, that was more diversity than I've ever seen in my entire life, even coming from Washington. It was amazing. And I noticed on the walls that there were signs that said, "We are inclusive, we value diversity, everyone is welcome." And I know that you've taken a stance on DEI, the new diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you explain the difference between the two?
I think so. I'm a little stubborn. Like I say, I'm quite a bit older than you, and a lot of the young moms now who are dealing with this, right? So I've had a couple more decades of loving the word diversity, of owning the word diversity. When we opened the School for New Americans in 2009 in West Valley City, it was because our hearts go to our refugees and immigrant families, and we know that America is the greatest hope they could ever have, but we noticed that some of them weren't experiencing great success, that first generation that came. For whatever reason, maybe they hadn't been in school, maybe they had been in camps, in relocation camps for many years. We'd get a 13-year-old who couldn't read and never spent a day in school. And our program, we just knew, we were so excited. Our program with our leveled learning would be great for these kids. They could come and they could learn from the beginning. And we could also teach them English in a really interactive way that is incredibly powerful and effective. And so we decided, even though we had 10,000 kids on our wait list in Draper at the time, we applied for West Valley, and we applied to open the School for New Americans. My brother was working on a nonprofit housing board. We were resettling a lot of Burmese and African refugees here at the time. And we decided to find a school close to where those housing units were, and opened our school in 2009. And it's just been a really exciting journey. And diversity is something that we know blesses everyone. So I grew up in Detroit. So in 1964, we had the race riots. There's a lot of history and a lot of things, but there's a lot of beautiful successes that happened since the 1960s. And to see the diversity that we have now, my high school did not have very much diversity, to be honest, in the 70s. Even though I was living near to Detroit, things were still very segregated. So a dream for me was to see everyone come together. And so I don't really let them take the word diversity and use it for their own, but I get that they are, and I'm not ignorant to it. Inclusion is another word that I just won't really give up willingly, because in our family, we've had special needs students, and my parents ended up with 52 grandchildren. So we have a huge wide spectrum of children. And so when one of my nephews was basically allowed to sit under his desk in a fifth grade classroom and read books or whatever he wanted to do because he couldn't participate, and his mom, decided to move him to our school, we were super excited because we were going to include him in the classroom, in the discussions, teach him the social skills explicitly, eye-to-eye contact, how to shake hands, two pumps and release, all these things that we teach our kids specifically at APA bless our disabled students so much. And so we want them in our classrooms as much as possible, all the time, every minute. And so we have a really special model where we hire a full-time paraeducator to be in every elementary classroom that we can find and afford, which opens that environment to so many more students all day long, because that person knows them and knows their IEP, can be with them at recess and transitions, can be there during history and science and all those classes where they can help them. And then we have leveled learning, where during their skills acquisition classes, they go to reading, math, or spelling in their own group. And for our special needs kids, that might be a group of special needs kids primarily, but it's usually a group of mixed kids, right, at their level. So inclusion to me, it's very dear to me, and I will not let them steal it. And when I say them, I mean people who want to make it mean something else. It means everyone truly together that can be together in a diverse setting, right? And then equity, that's the other word that's frustrating. We focus a lot at AP on equality and merit, and we will never stop. Those are American founding ideals, and equality and merit are better words actually than equity, because equity inserts a level of judgment. It implies a bias. And I know this is funny because now I'm using their words, right? And I'm not saying left or right. I'm saying there's people who are trying to steal words, and they're trying to defend them for their own purposes. And I've seen bad stuff on both sides, I'll be honest. So equity, it requires me to make a judgment. And at my age, I've learned the hardest way possible. You should never judge a child's capacity. You could just never actually judge their needs to be very different than someone else's, because you're probably wrong. You know, you have kids that come from really disturbed, traumatic backgrounds, and you'll have a student who you would never know it because of their personal coping mechanisms, their personality, their individual gifts. They come in ready to learn, and they don't need you to be taking time away from what you're supposed to be doing with them to distract from that, right? Because you think, well, they have brown skin and they came to school today without a lunch. And that means I think I better, it's like nonsense. People can handle their own lives. That is not equity. That is just somebody else making more inequality.
It's the bigotry of low expectations.
It can be, right? It could actually work the other way. I think it actually could work the high way. I mean, if you're asking an adult to make a judgment about what a child needs based on what they see, they might gauge low, they might gauge high, who knows? Instead, what we should do in America, if we want to do equality and fairness and not violate people's civil rights and the rights to privacy, that's what this is all about, is we prepare the feast. We prepare the feast and we offer it to all the students. Some students are going to love the grapes. Some students are going to love the chicken. Some students are going to love other things. But we keep it all on the table, because today they might like the grapes, but tomorrow, because their friend loved the chicken, they might learn to love the chicken. If I start deciding I'm not going to serve chicken to this group because they are just too traumatized, there's just no way. That would be inappropriate. I mean, you hear all this nonsense from people making these judgments, and it's like, no, all of our kids are going to learn this amazing art history, all of them. I don't care if I think that they can use it. I don't care if I think their parents know anything about art. Like, we decide and we put it in our charter. The beauty about charter schools is that we've put that all in our charter, so our parents know exactly what they're getting. They know what the curriculum is going to be. They can look into it. They can buy the books. So if they choose to come, I can guarantee to them, this is what your child's feast is going to look like. This is what we're doing. There's nothing hidden. And that frees my teachers to be happy and not to have to make decisions that are difficult for them. It frees my administrators to know clearly what they're watching for. It's just, to me, it's fair and it's equal. And equity that's the one word I don't really use anymore, because I think it just is so subjective. It kind of goes back to my nursing analogy. Like, it wouldn't be right for me to go in and decide that somebody did not need penicillin because I thought they didn't look like they needed penicillin.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, that is the biggest thing for me, is just the plethora of opportunities that these kids have. When you walk in and you see kindergartners learning to write in cursive, when you see the kids have amazing conversations about history and things that are sometimes painful to hear. They learned, my son is in 9th grade, and they learned about Jim Crow. And then their teacher not only taught them about Jim Crow, which seems like that is just the focus, American white supremacy in so many schools. That's the focus. But after he learned about Jim Crow, the teacher came in and said, now you're going to learn about oppression in Africa. Now you're going to learn about apartheid. And I'll tell you, quite frankly, to me, it's worse, which I happen to agree. But I appreciate that you can tell the truth and you can hear those ugly things, and no child walks away carrying the guilt for something they didn't do.
Right. And that out of control feeling it is to a child when the adults put out these big global problems as if they were supposed to somehow take responsibility for them or resolve. Those kids who are studying that in ninth grade and eighth grade, the core knowledge sequence, just to give a little background, in kindergarten is where we start learning about slavery. Not too much though. Mostly it's in kindergarten. It's not a big deal. Second grade, they kind of get into slavery. They introduce the word, I think, in kindergarten and when in their world studies, actually, right? But by
Right.
second grade, we're more deeply into a little bit slavery, immigration, just like you said. So it's like we do the whole unit on slavery and Harriet Tubman and the heroes of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln. They learn those names. They learn Abraham Lincoln's name in kindergarten too, actually, and learn the Gettysburg Address. So that's kind of introduced through that way, kindergarten and then second grade. And then like I say, there's a companion study of immigration in second grade. Why were people leaving their countries? Well, there was oppression there too. So do you see how they pair these truths so that we have context? In a classical education, context is critical. So then in fifth grade, our students come back to the Civil War, and this is where they really go deep into that era. They have a reenactment. They learn about the North and the South more truthfully than I think is normally presented. And then we get to eighth grade, which is the next place in the sequence where they go into an in-depth study of the Civil War when they're studying the second half of the U.S. history. So you can see the kids, they develop vocabulary, they develop a sense of geographic knowledge and understanding from early on. So we can talk about North and South. It makes sense to them because they had to memorize certain things early on so that they can have those thoughtful discussions you're talking about. By the time they're in eighth and ninth grade, they're actually discussing on a pretty deep level these kinds of issues.
Right. So somehow when these children are learning all of these hard things about history, there's still an underlining message that America's excellence. How do you do that?
Absolutely.
Especially with immigrants, because we know that a lot of immigrants are being told today, refugees are being told, America's not that great and this is how you can fight. And a lot of people are being taught to be activists. How
Yeah.
do you combat that?
Well, I'm teaching people to be activists too, so I'm not going to be a hypocrite. Anytime that you teach how to use the system of liberty in America and our government systems, you are hoping people will become active in that, right? Now, I don't find it difficult with our refugee and immigrant families to convince them America is great. They're the ones who already know it's great. Some have given up their everything, their careers, their education, and they come here and work low-level jobs, people with double master's degrees. Like, it's crazy what they're doing. And so when they bring their kids to my school, American Preparatory Academy, where we advertise what we want to do is help your child be prepared to be a really successful and flourishing American. Whether that looks to them like activism or not, it's not that many, honestly, that probably want to be activists, right? But whether that's just being great in their career area, in their communities, whatever it is, just being a great family member, right? That's part of our American values. And so we don't find that that the refugee and immigrants are buying it, at least not at our school. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. They wouldn't be listening to me talk about how great America is every time I get a chance, right? That the prosperity and the abundance that we are experiencing in the world is tied back directly to what we're doing here in America with our free markets and what we've done since the Industrial Revolution. So we teach about that. We show the charts. We help everybody understand it. We extend that to parents when we can. If I do a YouTube class or something on that, professional development, to help them get the right perspective. To me, what we need to be engaged in doing. So instead, I think we win for America when we take the time to give the data about prosperity, abundance, free market principles, things, and the people who are coming here, our immigrants and refugees, already know. They already lived in the camp, or they already lived in the oppressed nation where they couldn't get a job. They already know this. So they're not the hard audience. The hard audience, honestly, is our longtime generational American kids whose parents have checked out over the last 10 years. And our schools have become more diverse, even in Draper. They're greatly diverse. If you go to Draper, you'll be shocked at how diverse our school is. Our longtime American families started valuing something else. They started valuing, like their child, no for their children, or more time for soccer tournaments, And maybe that works fine. Like, I think it must, because these kids are still successful. Look at Utah's numbers. Our kids go to college. They do
Yeah.
great. They graduate from really good public high schools and things like that. But as far as people who really want this American understanding and classical education and deep content knowledge in science and history for their elementary kids and homework every day to learn habits of diligence and hard work, I am seeing a big erosion away from our longtime American families and a big influx from our immigrant refugee families who seem to be very hardworking.
Right. I always thought it would be very hard to convince these people who have come from such extreme oppression. But I've heard that they're being given information about how America is not that great and how they should stand up and demand more. Um, and I don't think the older people who've dealt with it. I think the children sometimes buy into it, especially if they've got their cell phones. They buy into these conversations. It was so that a lot of times the kids will just immediately go to the conversation, just, oh, well, that was racist. That's so racist. What I love, though, is that the teachers don't just say, yes, it absolutely is. They actually sit down with them and have conversations and say, well, why? Why do you think that that was racist? And the idea that our kids are not afraid to think critically, I think is vital, because I do know that there are people, even in like our community groups, who will really want, why can't we have CRT? CRT is being responsible. CRT is teaching our kids to see the world through a certain way. And you've taken a stance on CRT. Why have you taken a stance on
Yeah.
CRT?
Because when you study law, we memorize a lot of great information because we want to have that stored into our brain in a certain place that allows it to be used in logic. That logic is the piece that we're missing in our public schools. They call it critical thinking, but critical thinking actually, logic is a stepping stone in critical thinking, but kind of like the precursor to it. Critical thinking comes more in the rhetoric phase, which is that third phase where we're learning to defend our logic in writing and in speech. That's where we're making our arguments as APA. So a teacher at APA hears students say, well, that's just racist. They're going to sit down and go, let's walk through this logically. Because in 4th through 8th and 9th grade, we're really working a lot on logic. We're actually doing formal logic. They're doing syllogisms. They're learning all of the ways that you have to set up an argument. And so when you go to logic, there are rules. And it's wonderful. And people don't know this. And it's sad in America because they weren't raised in classical schools and they don't know logic. But when there's logic rules, like in debate, there's certain rules. And you can make your point and you can bring your evidence, but it doesn't mean you win. Most of the stuff you're hearing on the internet and in the news are people who are trying to just pretend like there are no rules of logic. Is that they draw these conclusions based on no evidence, because evidence is a big part of logic, and then they say them passionately in the rhetoric phase. They defend them. But we're all left feeling like, yeah, but where's the evidence under there? Where's the logic? And so CRT, it's missing all of the logic. Now, maybe not critical race theory as a theory that they study in colleges and that the intellects like to use as a stick against those of us who aren't intellectuals in colleges and say, well, you don't know what you're talking about because that is not CRT. So I'm going to give them their CRT and whatever they're doing. I'm not going to claim to understand that. The CRT that certain individuals, some of them from the colleges and university, are trying to push down upon K-12 education, I'm not confused by it. Again, we're going back to this clarity. Not confused by it. It's clear that they have lost the logic. They can't prove their arguments with evidence to me. And therefore, we don't give them any time or space. That's the critical point. And the less time and space we can give, and the more time we can spend on giving the logical arguments, the better. And so, for example, during the Civil War, over 640,000 Americans gave their lives in order to free Black people, predominantly Black people, from the horrific lives of slavery that they were living, right?
Right.
That's evidence. That's evidence that America cares. Mothers like me, I have 6 sons, gave their sons' lives so that other sons could be free. I'm sorry. We teach our kids this. We don't water it down. It is the most amazing thing that's happened in the world that we know of in this way, where a group of people this large gave their lives in order to free a group of people, a minority group of people. That is an astounding accomplishment of American idealism, American values. When someone wants to talk about critical race theory to me, I line up my logic points and I say, okay, we can talk about that, but first I want to ask, where do you place in your argument the fact that in an unprecedented, probably in the history of the world, 600,000 men gave their lives for a minority group of a different color skin mostly to have freedom and liberty. Gosh, where do you put that in CRT? Talk to me about where that fits in your theory and your philosophy. Usually they don't want to have the conversation, right? Anytime you
Yeah.
give any kind of evidence like what we've done in our country, talking about the 1960s and some of the laws that were passed, the Civil Rights Act and the amendments there that are so powerful, they don't want to talk about it. And so to me, we spend all of our time, fill all of our time and space with truth and evidence and logic. If they want to talk theory, it's a really easy way to do it. Say, you know what? K-12 is not really appropriate for theory. In any case, it's not evidentiary based. It's a theory. We work on logic. So that's my approach.
Right. It doesn't seem like children that age would even be able to understand that
No,
kind of a theory.
adults can't even understand the theory because I'm not sure there's enough logic in it. But that, again, that's my personal judgment. Can I just talk for just 1 second about
Yeah. Yes, please.
something recent? Let me ask you. So recently in Utah, we've had some very interesting things happen where those who like to see everything cleanly on the right or left, which I'm not, I'm definitely here center somewhere, right?
Right.
Um, but some things have happened here that have turned it topsy-turvy, right? I mean, suddenly things that you thought the conservatives would vote for, they didn't want, and and I have some of the people on the left helping me with some initiatives in school choice that you would not think they would, but they are advocating for our minority kids, and we know the data and the logic across the country is irrefutable that school choice benefits our disadvantaged, I hate to use that word, but our kids who come from communities of color and low income communities, it disproportionately advantages them. And so then you start to see people on the left coming in going, well, I want to support that, as we explain it. How are you feeling about some of these topics that are getting all topsy-turvy with regard to lines?
Oh man, you're gonna get me in trouble. I have to start with where I am personally, and where I'm at personally is that I don't see an option currently for my son because
That's
our
true.
school ends this year, right? So this makes me so sad. So my option is to drive like you did, 40 miles back and forth to school or to homeschool, but they've taken away, in my opinion, the safety of public schools, especially for minority kids, because they've bought into an agenda that I don't think is fair to any child, but especially not fair to tell a minority just because they're a minority that this is what's expected of them. So getting them out is where I am completely pro school choice because I just want them to be able to get out of that situation. It is devastating to watch people who have been so tight with each other turn on each other. And I understand the concerns. I don't want the federal overreach, but I also don't think anything will stop it if it's coming. So if we have if we have 2 years to fortify our kids, 2 years to get them out of systems, going to take a stance and say, we aren't going to allow this. And it's only 2 years. Well, then that's 2 more years we have to build in our children a sense of pride in our country and a sense of truth before postmodernism, which to me, postmodernism is just a giant lie.
So I understand the personal level, but on a little bit more macro level, I think I
Yeah.
can paint a much more positive picture and hopeful
Okay.
picture. So another thing Milton Friedman was doing with my dad back in the 70s was um, developing his idea of the school voucher. This was conceived by him. It was first named by him in his book, Free to Choose. And here we are 50 more years later, and we're starting to see the money, which is the power and control. Money equals power and control. Um, be wrested out of the hands of the government and given to parents. Now, I understand there's a lot of people who believe that the parents cannot be entrusted with that money, meaning the government, you are too weak, and the government is going to come in and you don't know it. You're just so innocent and you are so weak and you don't understand. You are nothing. You cannot stand up to them, and you are going to be taken over, and your kids and your homeschools are going to be taken over. And I think it's all nonsense. And I can say that because for 20 years, I have fought the system or used the system, I like to say better. I have used the system to bring free liberty-based education to 5,200 kids now in the state of Utah. I had 2 schools in Nevada at one time. I don't appreciate people with a big scary boogeyman story telling parents they can't, there's nothing they can do, and this is so dangerous. When I've been doing it for 20 years, I've been doing it for 20 years. So
Now, how
stop
have
the
you?
lies.
How have you done
I
it
use the
when other
system
charters haven't been able to? There have been
because
other charters who have buckled and become just as disastrous. I'm sorry to be blunt.
no, but that's the free nature kind of the system, meaning their boards are elected and the parents got together and they elected boards just like in your public district. The people who get elected get to just set the course for that school. In our school, I said we will not have an elected board. And that's in the law in Utah that charter schools do not have to have elected boards. Otherwise, they can't stay on mission. And I already had this experience where our schools didn't stay on mission in Colorado. That's why we started a school, gave it all our blood, sweat, and tears, and then it didn't turn out to be what we wanted because someone else comes in and kind of takes over, right? And so I knew a few things. And one was when I got here that we will not have an elected board, that the vision has to stay true. And how do you do that? And we set up structures. And guess what? The system allows it. Yes, they don't like it. And they tried to, in the very first year or two, they tried to change the rule. And I went up to the legislature, to Administrative Rules Review Committee, when they were trying to change the rule to require charter schools to have elected boards. And luckily, we had a lot of support from the legislature. We always have. And they said, no, we didn't put that in the law for a reason. So I had to fight. I had to go back. I had to pay attention. And
Right.
that's allowed all of us to just keep our autonomy and have the liberty of having the school the way we want it in the vision. But it requires some energy. It requires some dedication. But you can do it. Is there a danger that you might have to change rules? It's not a danger. It's an everyday fact of life. So when the voucher thing comes in play, there's going to be tons of rules written. That's when the work of vigilance begins. That's when we make sure that we're in that process. We're watching as they're publicly released, and we go back to the rules committee, the legislature, and say, this is what they're thinking. Are you thinking this? And they can push back and go, nope. What you're hearing from some people is once the government's in, there's nothing you can do. That is an ignorance of our system.
As long as they believe that lie, they're not going to do anything to fight against it. I think the problem is that so many people believe there's nothing that they can do. They've bought into that. Government schools create people who create government citizens that because they believe there's nothing that they can do, they don't do anything. And then things get passed. We all have to be the gatekeeper. Again, if you're vigilant, and so many people don't want to be, that's been one of the most frustrating things of the last 2 years is people don't want to be inconvenienced.
My parents don't. People think my parents would be activists. They're so not. They're so happy in general to be at my school that they're just like, what are you talking about? You're worried about what? They don't even, they tune out of the problem, right? Because
I
they're
agree.
like, it's not a problem for me. I've got a great school. I'm not going to worry about it, And
I
that's
agree.
their right, So I'm taking care of a lot of that for them and they appreciate it. But my biggest competitors are going to be maybe private schools, right?
Yeah.
Public school parents aren't going to jump to private schools.
Right.
Those who've already held their nose and said, I can put up with this, they're not probably going to deal with the whole private school thing. It's going to be the people who are already exercising choice in charter schools who are most
Right.
likely to make the next step to a even more free kind of education. I don't mean money free, right?
Right.
Or liberty. And so that creates a ton of pressure on us to now really make sure our game is up our game, make sure that we're competitive with whoever might come in.
Well, I think you answered my big question on how, because I've always wondered, and other people have asked me, how does APA manage to do this? And I think that you do is by having a vision and being committed to that vision and not letting, because the thing is that there are lots of people, and I know I sound very black-pilled, but there are lots of people who will pretend to be one way and go in and want to change things. So I think that having a border wall up there that's just saying, yeah, you're not going to get past us. You can't get past. This is the vision. This is where we're staying. This is what we're committed to, is the way that every single person, what I always tell people is draw your line in the sand. And APA's drawn its line in the sand.
Yeah, and we're right, and we are on the side of lawful. We are compliant. We are keeping every law, rule, and regulation of compliance that's required of a public school. But you read those carefully and you find out you have a lot of latitude with regard to what you're going to teach your students. I believe in full transparency to parents. I want my parents to know exactly what we're teaching. And I just want to, if you don't mind me going off topic for just 1 second on the Sharp survey.
Yeah,
Do you know
absolutely.
about the Sharp survey?
I do.
Have you read it? Okay, so I don't know if you've seen the student version. So sometimes they'll publish and because they've had to, like in a PDF version or something. But what you don't get to see if you don't see the student version Sharp survey, like when they put the questions into the survey in front of the kids, they organize the questions in a way that does a bunch of mind programming with the kids. And so, for example, it'll say, how many times in the last blah, 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 however many weeks or month or whatever, or even year, have you, and then they'll list like 7 things. And in those 7 things, it'll say things like done community service, stolen a car, right next to each other. So they'll have good normal things, like 2 or 3 kind of normal things. Then they'll have like smoked or taken an illegal drug. And then I'll have a good thing. And then I'll have stolen a car. And then they'll have, or driven a car without a license or something like really. And you can see by putting those things all together how it normalizes the bad behaviors.
Right.
In a child's mind, it normalizes them. It's like people who work at the soup kitchen and do service projects on the weekends. Like sometimes they just smoke weed too. Like kids who never would think of putting these things together in a person. Right. And I mean, we are just horrified at the Sharp survey. The other reason why we don't like the Sharp survey and won't give it to our students is because it doesn't, the data doesn't really benefit anyone, in my opinion. It's not an individual, right? They don't know who the kid is that puts that they're in this dangerous situation or that they're using or they're whatever they're doing. You don't know who those. So what does that do to teachers when they say to them, oh gosh, did you know that like 20% of your kids use drugs? It does something to teachers because
Right.
they don't know who they are, right?
Right.
And so that's not good. And the other, so it doesn't help the students individually. You're not getting the student help with addiction. So the only thing you're left to think is, well, is it because we don't know that kids use drugs? We don't know that kids steal from the stores? We don't know this, and so we have to do a survey to learn that that's ridiculous. Of course we know this, right?
Right.
So what's
Yeah.
the purpose? I want to know. I'm putting it out there. What's the purpose? I don't think it helps with suicide prevention. I don't think it helps with anything.
From what I understand, it's about data control. They find out these things and then that pushes their agenda.
Oh,
Oh, well, you
absolutely.
have this many
Yes,
people, so you need this program.
absolutely. And not just program. This is for the medical, this is for the pharmaceutical companies, this is for
Right.
everybody. Of course, that's exactly what it's for. And so we need to be clear and honest about it. And we need to say, no way, not in our schools. There is no benefit to the Sharp survey. It shouldn't be done.
Well, I just saw yesterday a child wellness curriculum. And one of the things it said was, do your parents have guns? Do your neighbors have guns? The safe thing to do if you know somebody who has a gun is go and tell your teacher. And I'm just like, why? If a person's unsafe, I completely understand. If a gun is left out publicly, I completely understand where a child can access it. After that, it seems like an invasion of our constitutional rights.
So much for bringing that up. Because then the last point about the Sharp survey is normalizes the kids to think the government should be appropriately asking them questions like this. When a teacher, and you're a good kid, right? And I'm going to give you this thing, and I'm your teacher, and you're the A student or B, right? And you want to do what's right. A teacher gives you something that the government is asking you questions that are very personal and violation of your privacy and your family's privacy. In the Sharp survey, they ask you things like, how many times do your parents argue at dinner? What do they argue about? What kinds? I mean, like, you can't believe it. It's unbelievable. And so to me, to normalize that this kid thinks the government should be asking you these questions is the biggest problem with the survey overall that I see, is that training up a generation of kids who think it's okay for the government to ask. It's not. And I'm the government. The school's the government. I'm a charter school. I'm actually the government, and I keep that role very with as much awareness of stewardship and service as I can, but it doesn't matter. I'm the government. I'm the
Right.
government representative. And so we have to be so careful that we are not pushing things on our kids that are inappropriate in a violation of their own civil rights.
Well, that's the thing, is it comes down to your choice. Schools don't have to go overboard with things like social and emotional learning. Can I ask you about that? Your view of SEL?
When it first came out, they started by just implementing a term, right? They didn't define it. It was just like, this is just what kids need. Don't we agree all kids need this? And I'm like, yeah. And I have an amazing program. It's called Builders and Ambassadors. And that is our social emotional learning program. It's like teaches the kids how to be socially with each other appropriately and in every setting. Our goal, of course, with our program, as you know, help the kids be comfortable in every setting and confident in their skills and how to interact with others. So that's social. The emotional part for us is when kids have those skills, they tend to be more emotionally healthy, period. Like we're not a therapeutic center. I'm a psychiatric nurse, so believe me, I get this whole thing. I know where the lines and the boundaries are. And so We read stories, and so emotional development in schools, in classical schools, happens through kids reading classical literature, experiencing the loss of a dog in Old Yeller and processing that together, experiencing Pollyanna becoming paralyzed and through reading literature and processing through that. When I say processing through it, through Pollyanna, not through them and not through their personal experience and not through, it's through the literature. It's vicariously done. That's how classical education works, is that we read history, primary sources, we read literature, and vicariously we learn about what happens to people who steal. Bad things happen, yes. But is it sometimes okay to steal? We read Les Mis and we say, ooh, now we're getting into some good ethics conversations, and we help kids explore. But these are vicariously done. We're not asking them about their dad who's in jail. We're not. It's not our deal. And a lot of times our kids who are most emotionally fragile are hoping for a place to get away. They come to school in the morning and this is their safe place, and they don't have, no one asks them how they're feeling, and no one asks them how their dad's doing, and they don't, or their mom, or whatever the problems are. Asking is a violation of their privacy, in my opinion. Kids need to have the right to come to school and to be immersed in an amazing, emotionally nurturing environment where they vicariously learn all these skills of emotional resilience through literature and history. And if we do have counselors at APA too. If the student indicates that they would like, or we see a sign that tells us there's a danger point, we definitely reach out and we hug that kid tight and offer whatever we can, right? Of course. But on the general, the feast is prepared to provide social development and emotional development in the feast itself. Classical education, everything comes together in one big, beautiful whole. We fulfill any outcomes that they might want with regard to good things like healthy kids, but we don't violate kids' privacy.
Well, and you don't define exactly what healthy is. What I see in a lot of social and emotional curriculum is that there's only one right way to be, only one right way to think. And it oftentimes is linked with politics. It's very
It's so
strange.
true. We do agree on a few things. Like we don't think it's good for our kids socially or emotionally to have cell phones at school. And so
Right.
they're not allowed at our school at all. And we also believe that academically the feast is best presented not on a screen. And so
Right.
we limit screen time at our schools, right? We try, and we ask our families to limit it at home as well. So we have certain things that we think contribute to wholeness and flourishing of students. But you're right, we don't define it beyond that.
And Carolyn, we've had this talk before, but you've said it multiple times in the conversation, the feast, a feast is prepared. I remember the first time I spoke with you, you talked about the great conversation. Can you just explain what that great conversation is? No matter where you come from in life, you can have an opportunity to have a seat at this table.
And we need you. We need everyone. That's the message of America, right? Is we're made better when everyone comes to the table, prepared with logic and evidence to be part of the great conversation. So the great conversation is the idea that we talk about important things at school. When we're reading books and literature, they do spur important conversations about ethics and about honesty and about the values we're talking about. In this case, what was violated? Honesty. Okay, what was the outcomes and the consequences of that? Oh my goodness, do we see that ever? Yes, we do. So this conversation is built around a lot of American ideals, I will be honest, because we believe that everyone should have an equal seat at the table. But they do need to come prepared with their logic and evidence. And that's kind of a piece that's missing from many schools who believe that, yeah, kids should be able to critically think and have open discussion. It's not really what the feast is. The feast is you come and we give you all this, and then we sit down after, because of what you do after you have a great meal. The best thing is to sit around and talk, right? The great conversation happens once we have that in us and we have ideas we've been thinking about, and we have logic and we've made our own conclusions, and now we want to test them out. We want everyone at the table, but they can't come if they're not all given the feast. And the problem with equity decisions is that they decide who shouldn't have what. Well, that student shouldn't take Latin. It's totally irrelevant to them. How is that going to help this brown child who's come to us? We get this. It's so racist. I'm sorry, but it's a terribly racist thing to say, and people say it. Well, it's very inappropriate that you guys would focus on that in West Valley when we very first started with refugees. You're going to make them take Latin for 3 years. And we're like, yeah, we believe in equality in America. When they leave, they'll never take another Latin class again or use it. That's fine. That's their choice. But we don't decide to discriminate who gets what. So that's kind of the beautiful feast and then conversation analogy that we use.
So basically, if you miss the part that this is a charter school, which means that it is free for people to come to this school. So people who would not have the opportunities. If you are in Utah and you are anywhere near this school, I could not more highly recommend it. Wherever you come from in life, eventually the school will lift you up, or at least it gives you the tools to be lifted up. If you don't take them, that's on you. But the opportunity that doctors and lawyers send their kids to private schools for is available. To me, you could look at this school and all of the problems in the other schools could be fixed. Now, I understand that people will say the rigor isn't for every child or X reason this wouldn't fit, but just the opportunity to have it, things that would normally be denied so many of us. Coming from where I come from as growing up in the foster system, growing up with extreme abuse and extreme trauma, I can completely agree that everything she said about wanting to escape and the idea that you could escape into this magical world of learning that's kind of an unlimited potential, I think should give us hope. And like I said, I know that sometimes I'm black pilled and I'm just like, oh, how do we get through this? But we get through it by finding those windows of hope. Education doesn't need to be a mirror. In fact, I think most of the time it shouldn't be a mirror, but it should be a window to look out into the world and to see all of the different things that we can learn, grasp from other people. And I'm so grateful, Carolyn, that you created this. Everyone has a purpose, but I'm so grateful that you found yours and that you have shared it with so many people and that you continue to share it with so many people.
Well, and I'm grateful I live in a
Going.
nation and a country and a state that allows it.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. We can create whatever schools we want. We have all the laws we need. We just need the people who will stand up and stand with me and do it. It takes a lot of courage, and I've had a lot of friends who start this journey who have fallen by the way because they just can't handle the pressure, right? It's tough. We get attacks from all sides, as you know.
Right.
But it's so little compared to what we're doing. So thank you. Thank you. And you're a great voice for this, Carrie. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having the conversation with me, Carolyn. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Okay, bye-bye.